This morning, one of the greatest aviation mysteries. On the third anniversary of the disappearance of Malaysia Airlines Flight 370, still no answers and new theories of mass murder. Plus,
Buy American and hire American.
President Trump scores high in his first address before Congress. Now, can he deliver? Hear what our analysts have to say.
This is the Emmy Award-winning 11 News Close-Up with your host, Marvin Scott.
Good morning, everyone. Next Wednesday will mark 3 years since Malaysia Airlines Flight 370 vanished in the darkness of night somewhere over the vast Indian Ocean with 239 people on board. Despite a $160 million exhaustive search effort over a 46,000 square mile area, the plane still has not been found, making this one of the greatest aviation mysteries since the disappearance of aviation pioneer Amelia Earhart's plane some 80 years ago. The theories, they abound as to what happened to Flight 370, including the possibility of murder-suicide by the pilot. Believing that all approaches had been exhausted, the three countries involved in the search decided in January to call it quits.
The decision to abandon the search was made by Malaysia, China, and Australia, the three major countries involved in the search. With the support of 20 other countries, they've scoured thousands of square miles beneath the Indian Ocean, looking for a needle in a haystack. The flight left Kuala Lumpur just after midnight, bound for Beijing, but dropped off radar an hour after takeoff. Satellite images led investigators to conclude the plane went down in the Indian Ocean. The plane made unexplained turns, and flight simulations indicated it spiraled in its final moments, descending thousands of feet per minute. Justin Green and Marc Moller are aviation attorneys who are representing 50 families of the 239 victims. They have been to the search area.
Calling off the search in the area where they were looking is understandable. Stopping the search entirely is not justified. I think the search should continue. I think the aviation community demands knowing why this happened.
Marc Moller has been dealing with aviation disasters for 50 years. How, in this day and age, with all the state-of-the-art advances, can a plane and its passengers suddenly disappear without a trace?
The technology is not presently designed to keep track of all aircraft all the time.
Parts of the plane have been found, washed up on beaches in East Africa and elsewhere, but none has led searchers to the wreckage. Though the search is off for now, Malaysian airline officials are open to the possibility of someday resuming it.
But someday, it's just not soon enough for the families of loved ones who are on that plane. Now, aviation attorney Justin Green, who is also a pilot, along with Marc Moller, who you saw in that report, they're attorneys with the aviation law firm of Kreindler Kreindler, and they've been investigating airline disasters and involved in them for many, many years. Thank you so much for coming in. Now, you've been to the search area and you've studied this situation extensively. Have you been able to come up with some plausible response as to what happened to Flight 370?
As an accident investigator, you have to identify what are the known facts. And in this case, the known facts are an airplane took off, had a normal takeoff, normal climb out, normal transit until about the time that they were supposed to check in with Vietnam Air Traffic Control, and the airplane went dark. The transponder, which sends the signal out to air traffic control, went off. The ACAR system, which is a airplane-to-ground communication system, stopped communicating, and then the airplane turned, and then turned again, and then turned again. So what we know is no warnings, no problems from the airplane. We know that there was no other indication of a problem, mechanical problem with the airplane, and we also know we have 3 turns that had to have been made by the pilots. Now, the bigger questions are, why did the pilots turn the airplane? Did they turn it because there was a mechanical issue, or, as many have posited, did they turn it because this was a murder-suicide conducted by one or both of those pilots?
And there was no communication. The last communication was
everything was normal.
370, good night.
Everything was normal. The last communication, everything was normal.
Now, what about this theory? Let's talk more about that. Marc, the former Prime Minister of Australia, has come out and said that he believes this was a situation. He didn't say murder-suicide. He said mass murder.
Well, if it's a murder-suicide with a plane full of people, it is a mass murder. There's no question about it.
Leaving the possibility to the pilot, if he was responsible for this, could have gotten away.
Well,
Theory.
Theory. There are all sorts of theories that one can create based upon the fact that we know so little. We know what the airplane did, as Justin described, but after the airplane made the turns, we really know very, very little. The plane disappears. It flies for several hours, obviously, until there was fuel exhaustion, and then ends up in the water. Whether that's a murder-suicide, whether there was some oxygen deprivation, whether there was decompression, whether there was some kind of mechanical failure is unknown. And the problem is that until one has more information, we're stuck with theories.
Let me talk a little more about this theory that brought out by the former Australian Prime Minister that if this was a survivable landing, because they did find a part of that aircraft on an island, and they said that the aileron, part of that was raised up, would indicate that it was set for a landing, and it could have been a soft landing on the water. And if it was survivable and everyone was out because of oxygen deprivation and the pilot was still there and intended something, he could have gotten away. Sounds like something from a Robert Ludlum novel.
It's good material for a novel, but whether that actually happened is impossible to know at this point. That's the problem. There are so many imponderables, such an absence of information that we're stuck with theories, and that's the frustrating thing.
How is it?
Can I?
Please, Mark.
The part that they found a part. The first major part of the aircraft was what's called a flaperon, which you referred to. And then there was a lot of talk about that it was set for landing, but that was all based on an expert who was basing his entire opinion on photographs. The investigation later came out and said that they believed it was not set for landing. And that's important because they defined the search area with the assumption that the pilot was not actually flying, steering the airplane, and that it basically just went in, without active steering by the pilot. So the investigation is saying that it was not set for landing. I do believe that because we have only found small parts of the aircraft, it's likely that the aircraft landed and possibly was a survivable type landing.
And if this was done intentionally by landing it, the intent would be the aircraft would not break apart and just simply sink into the bottom.
You can speculate, but it would, if this person was trying to disappear this airplane, landing it in a way that it didn't break apart and was much harder to find would make sense. But,
Okay.
But that's speculation.
Let's take a break and find out how is it this day and age, and I asked you that question when we did that report, Mark, how in this day and age can we just lose an aircraft like that? We'll find out more when Pix 11 News Close-Up continues. Back with Justin Green and Marc Moller of Kreindler Kreindler and talking about Malaysia Air 370, which disappeared 3 years ago this coming Wednesday. We talked about the theory of murder-suicide. What about something that was accidental? Perhaps, and we were talking about oxygen deprivation. Could something like that have happened in flight?
Well, whatever happened would have to be something that incapacitated the pilots in some fashion. So when you don't have enough oxygen, your brain doesn't work properly. If there was a problem, the first turn is totally explainable because they basically turn back towards where they took off from. A return to base, could make sense. The next two turns are less easy to explain, but hypoxia is a leading, if you put aside mass murder, suicide, hypoxia or some sort of fire that had the same sort of effect on the pilot's brains.
Or loss of power, but it's those manual turns are what makes it also suspect.
Well, one of the things that fits the loss of oxygen or oxygen deprivation theory is the fact that the first turn may have been an effort to get back to Kuala Lumpur. Now they're losing oxygen, they're losing ability to think clearly. They make a couple of other turns in an effort to do something to rectify the problem. And then they run out of oxygen, they run out of steam, they can't breathe. And the last turn then sends you south until the plane runs out of fuel. So if there are two major theories, one is oxygen deprivation with the pilots trying to save the plane, and the other is an active measure by the pilots to kill the passengers.
Now, Captain Zahari Ahmad Shah, he was investigated by the FBI, seemed to have a normal life, no conflicts that were evident, and he hugged and kissed his wife before he left at the airport, but they did find a simulator at his home that had the same tracking of the aircraft. That's very mystifying, isn't it?
It's mystifying. It's an interesting coincidence. Whether it relates to this flight or not, one doesn't know. Pilots frequently have simulators in their home. I can't explain, nor can anybody else, why the simulator was there, why the tracking was what it was. But if you get into the accident investigation itself, you still don't have an answer as to what happened.
I'll tell you, the one thing about that simulation was that it had been deleted. So they were able to recreate it, find it on his system. But I think what's really important is, why do we need to find out what happens in these aviation disasters? The answer is, if this was a mass murder or suicide, the lessons learned from knowing that 3 years ago this Captain Shaw or maybe his first officer did something horrific like this, the safety investigators, airlines could have prevented the German wings disaster, where a pilot,
Egypt Air,
well, that was before that. But the truth is right now we have a 777, one of the most widely flown aircraft, disappeared 3 years ago, and we don't know why it disappeared. So that's when the families really need and demand that at some point answers about what happened to the loved one have to be found.
But what about an answer? And the two of you have dealt extensively in aviation accident disasters. In this day and age, how can you simply lose such a giant aircraft with so many people aboard with no trace?
Well, the question invites a demand to find out, because right now we don't know the answer. It's the absence of an answer that demands that the search continue, that the search for answers continues, so that whatever caused this is prevented from happening in the future.
Isn't there technology out there? There was some satellite sighting of the aircraft.
The technology exists. The technology exists. The desire, the demand to implement technology that will keep track of an airplane wherever it is has not it's not mature to the point where the international community does something.
There were a lot of different proposals, one of which is to start streaming the information from the two black boxes, the cockpit voice recorder and the flight data recorder, which investigators use to try to determine what happened. Other proposals, all have their own complications, but to me the easiest thing would be to have a regular check-in position reporting by airplanes to satellites. So if something happens, they can find the wreckage a lot faster and find the black boxes and find out what happened, make sure it doesn't happen again.
What about that material that is recorded on those black boxes? Why can't that be downloaded during flight?
It can be. That's just the point that Justin's making.
Yeah, that's the streaming issue, and that's a complication issue. I mean, you think about thousands of airplanes all up in the sky at the same time, all streaming that stuff, and the cost and complication of that, and also the concern that pilots have that the cockpit voice recorder, recordings of their conversations are being downloaded, all kind of complicated for this kind of very extreme, unlikely situation where an airplane disappears and they can't find the black boxes.
Do you expect that search to resume at some point?
Hard to tell.
You're hopeful.
I'm very hopeful. I'm hopeful because in a very narrow sense, the families are entitled to know what happened, and the aviation community needs to know what happened.
Now, you represented 50 families. Have they all settled their cases?
Not all. Not all.
Still some outstanding.
Still some outstanding. And the ones who settled are no less demanding of answers than the ones who haven't.
I have
settled.
to wrap, but in conclusion, at this moment, you see as the most plausible explanation, murder-suicide?
No.
Still other theories
Still
out there.
don't know.
Okay, still 3 years later, and we still don't know.
That's right.
What happened to Flight 370?
Hopefully we'll find out someday.
Marc Moller, Justin Green, thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you, Marvin.
And we're going to take a break. When we come back, President Trump's address to Congress, a pivotal moment in his presidency, but will it undivide a divided Congress? We'll hear what our analysts have to say. Stay with us.
Very smooth.
President Trump entered the halls of Congress Tuesday night with one of the lowest approval ratings of any new president, but he left with high marks from the majority of those who heard his speech.
Our obligation is to serve, protect, and defend the citizens of the United States. We are also taking strong measures to protect our nation from radical Islamic terrorism. Tonight, I am also calling on this Congress to repeal and replace Obamacare. With reforms that expand choice, increase access, lower costs, and at the same time provide better health care. We must restore integrity and the rule of law at our borders. For that reason, we will soon begin the construction of a great wall along our southern border. I will be asking Congress to approve legislation that produces a $1 trillion investment in infrastructure of the United States, financed through both public and private capital, creating millions of new jobs. This effort will be guided by two core principles: Buy American and Hire American.
The new battle cry: Buy American, Hire American. Joining me now, our political analyst, Morgan Beckma. He's the executive director of the think tank Effective New York and co-host of Effective Radio on 970 AM. And Chapin Fay is a political strategist with the Mercury Group. Gentlemen, it was quite a speech. So what's your take on it? How did he do?
I mean, I think the reviews were largely positive. He showed greater message discipline. There were still a lot of platitudes, not a lot of concrete answers. But above all, I was thinking about my cat. You know, my cat gets a lot of hairballs and tends to vomit almost every day on the bed or on the floor. And when we come home and he hasn't vomited, we congratulate him for that, right? Not because he did something good, but because he didn't vomit on the bed. And I think that this is kind of like, we have so lowered our expectations for the president that he can give a conventional speech that doesn't, you know, cause some sort of fracas, and we congratulate him for it. And that's where we are right now.
That was some analogy. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you. That's.
Well, I don't have a cat, and I agree with some of what Morgan said, but I think this speech was a home run. I mean, he doesn't have to have specifics and results yet. He's been the president for a month. This wasn't candidate Trump spewing red meat and firing up a base. This was President Trump, I think, delivering a very powerful, pragmatic, good, calm, cool, collected, positive, and inclusive vision as he sees his presidency for America and Americans. And I think that the rubber will meet the road when he, you know, has to show results. But for now, I think the speech was an absolute home run.
He stuck to the script, and he had a much softer tone than we have known to come from Donald Trump. But he didn't impress many of the Democrats, or any Democrats.
Well, he never does, and I don't think he needs to worry about that. I think he laid out his vision, and he now needs to not necessarily stick to the script, but stick to his plan and getting things done. If he starts to achieve some of these results, the Democrats are still going to rant and rave, but I think you'll see Americans
Morgan,
supporting him.
Do you think he can achieve it? We saw Democrats there, particularly he's talking about Obamacare and those members, the women wearing white who had thumbs down. Can he achieve? Even he has acknowledged that difficult time
He's
ahead.
been one of the most polarizing and confrontational candidates all throughout the election season, and then over the first month in the presidency. You can't just pivot overnight and now be the great unifier. Usually you do that in your inaugural address. He did not do that. And so, you know, it's certainly a Johnny-come-lately to unity.
But it is so divided, and it is such a controversial issue that he wants to get through, and it was a primary thing of his campaign to get the Affordable Care Act repealed and replaced. But he hasn't come up with anything. He says he wants greater access, lower costs. But no specifics.
I mean, and that's the problem, right? Replacing the Affordable Care Act will be immensely difficult. Republicans and Democrats alike agree on that. Tax reform is going to be immensely difficult. Building the wall, all the things that he wants to do are immensely difficult. And during the campaign, you can, spew out a bunch of platitudes and say we're going to get it done. But when you're governing, it's a much more difficult proposal.
And he also, another highlight was the immigration. He seemed to take a more moderate tone on immigration reform, quite different from that travel ban, which he had an executive order on a month ago.
That's right, and I think you're seeing him adapt and respond to the measures that he's taking, right, which I think we want all of our presidents and elected officials to do. He met with some legal and public opinion resistance. Now, I don't advocate changing at the whim of public opinion, but I think he's going to roll out something new with changes that will satisfy some of the legal and public opinion critics. And like I said, he's never going to satisfy any of his critics or all of his critics any of the time. So I don't think he should take that into account. But I think what you're seeing is him governing, right? He's been in office for a couple of weeks, and I think already you're seeing these positive changes in the way his style and the way he's getting things done, right? So we're going to see another travel order, immigration order, and I think it's going to be better and tighter and survive this time.
This was a pivotal moment in his presidency, just a couple of months old.
I would argue that he's actually been more responsive to the negative polling. This is a president who is very self-conscious or aware of how the public is perceiving him. There's been, he has suffered from extremely low approval ratings for an incoming president. And he's also been dealt some very serious legal setbacks to his agenda. And so he had no choice but to try to go a different direction. And yes, he did that successfully in one speech. But the very next day, he was again mired in really problematic controversy that is lingering and is, could possibly, railroad his whole agenda.
Let me digress from the speech for a moment and talk about that controversy and talk about his new Attorney General, Jeff Sessions. Now it has been said that he spoke to the Russian ambassador before Trump took the oath of office.
Yeah, what is clear is that the Attorney General, gave a very misleading answer at best during his confirmation hearings about his dealings with the Russians. He says it didn't pertain to the campaign, but he could have specified that during the confirmation hearings. And now he's in real trouble, and it looks like he's going to have to recuse himself from the ongoing investigation into Trump's ties with the Russians.
Now, this is the second situation coming after Mike Flynn, his national security advisor, had to step aside because he wasn't forthright in his meetings with Russians.
Well, I think the Attorney General probably should recuse himself. I'm an attorney. I always think you should recuse yourself just to avoid any even bare minimum of conflict. But let's also remember that he was a United States Senator before he was the Attorney General. It's not inappropriate for him to be talking to anybody.
But before he was even appointed, before there was even a new president.
Well, that's right. He was a United States Senator. And so, this country has a long history of United States senators working with the Russians to defeat, for one, President Ronald Reagan. But I'm not saying that Senator Sessions did that. And I'm merely saying that he was a United States senator. He can talk to whomever he wishes and he dealt with foreign policy. If he's giving differing answers, that's a problem. And I think he should recuse himself just to avoid any appearance of
conflict. And Chapin's absolutely right. There's nothing wrong with him meeting with Russian officials. The problem is that he gave a misleading answer during his confirmation hearings, and that's the hot water he finds himself in.
That's the issue, and a similar issue to what happened with Mike Flynn. So what do you feel that the impact of this congressional address is going to be?
Well, we'll see. It sounded good in the moment, yes, but,
I totally agree. I mean, it was popular, and I think he always does well when he speaks directly to the people. And as Morgan mentioned, the stuff that happens the next morning, that's because the distractions start to pipe up and get into the news feeds.
And he talked about putting up that wall, but this is the first time he didn't say the Mexicans want to pay for it.
That's true, and I mean, he is pivoting away from a lot of the things that he promised. He's been very determined to keep his promises, but we see there's elasticity in them.
And there was a very favorable response, and 78% of the people taking the CNN poll said they had a favorable response to his speech. Okay, Chapin and Morgan, thank you very much. Good to have you on the program. And that'll do it for our program this week. If you have any comments or wish to see this broadcast again, log on to our website at pix11.com/newscloseup. I'm Marvin Scott. Thanks for joining us. Enjoy the rest of your Sunday, everyone.